Yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So,
yes.
I am Veronica MacIsaac, and I am a fashion designer, and I specialize in tartan and sort of Celtic fabrics in my designs, which kind of confuses a lot of people when I say that, and I think they sort of picture like gift shop things at first, but it's actually just using those traditional fabrics in a modern way.
So like Cindy was telling me that you're from a family of world famous kilt makers.
My parents, my mom is a kilt maker, and my dad kind of runs the business side. And my mom's been making kilts for over 30 years, and they sell all over the world. And that business actually started because of me, in a way. When I was young, I was a Highland dancer, and I had a little kind of kiltie that my cousins had passed down through the family. And when I had outgrown it, my mom was a seamstress. She has a degree in textiles, and she thought, well, maybe I can figure out how to make a kilt. And so she did, and that was for me. And eventually more and more people kind of found out about that, people in my dance class. Her brothers are pipers. My brother, her son, was a piper. So she started making kilts for other people. Eventually she decided to do it as a business. And that was 31 years ago.
Jeez. Like, what kind of experience do you need to be able to like make these kind of materials?
Well, it's not making the material. It's taking the material and making it into traditional garments.
Yeah.
So we're not weaving. A lot of people kind of think that I'm actually weaving the tartan myself, but I'm not. I'm importing the tartan from Scotland and England. But it's an interesting thing. I mean, the clothes that I make are just modern clothes made out of tartan. So if you know how to make clothing, you can take the fabric. Tartan is just a fabric.
Yeah.
It can be made into anything. But what my mother does, it is the traditional art form of kilt making, which is all hand-stitched, like needle and thread hand-stitched. And it takes 22 hours to make each kilt. So that's not, it's not something you can just buy a pattern for and make. It's a really long process, and it's not just anybody who can kind of pick it up. It takes a long time to perfect.
Did it ever like feel like kind of like passing the torch, like from what they used to do, like working into your business now? Like,
yeah, it was interesting because I actually was trying to tell my mother that this is what she should do. She had the established kilt making business. She had a couple of women that she had trained to be kilt makers underneath her, who were helping make the kilts. And I said, you really need to be focusing on women's wear, because there's a huge market for it. If a man comes in to buy a kilt, his wife probably wants to maybe not match him, but at least compliment him. There is definitely a market here for it. And at the time, I started talking to her about this in the early to mid 2000s. And at the time, the only things that were available were mid-calf length pleated skirts that were big in the 50s, like in my grandmother's era. The crossbody sash, which isn't flattering on anybody's body type, or the Catholic schoolgirl Britney Spears look, or the 1800s bar wench. And those were basically it for tartan clothes for women. I'm not interested myself in a single one of those looks, not for anything outside of Halloween. So growing up in a Scottish family, my brother plays the pipes for a living, my parents are kilt makers, we go to a lot of Scottish culture events. I don't want to wear something that I wouldn't wear normally. I want to wear something that is in my own personal style. I just want it to be in tartan. So I was saying this to my mother. This is something that you should add to your business. You should absolutely start implementing this. She kept giving me 1,000 reasons why she didn't want to. I don't have time. I'm not creative enough to come up with those ideas. I told her, I will come up with the ideas. I will make the samples for you. I'll make the patterns for you. I just think that this is something you need to do. It's a perfect addition to your business. I said it to her for years. And finally, a few years, 3-4 years after I started talking to her about it, she said, why don't you do it? And it had never occurred to me that I should do it. I thought this was her business. This is what she should do. And I said, but wouldn't that be in competition with you? And she said, no, we make traditional kilts. If you want to make modern tartan clothing, that makes total sense. That's exactly what you should do, though.
And at what point was this? Like, what year was it?
Well, I launched in 2008. It was probably 2007, 2008 that we had this conversation, and I was just sort of like, ooh, why did I not think of this before? She said, you're literally offering to do all of the steps. Why don't you just take that and put your own name on it? Yeah. And so, yeah, I did. I launched in 2008.
Wow. So what did it take to like make that jump? Like, were you in Halifax at the time, or?
I was, yep. I was in Halifax. I'd only been back, actually. I'd lived down in the States, and I'd been back, a year, a little over a year, maybe. I think about a year and a half by the time I actually launched. I had actually done a tartan fashion show earlier in 2008 for Tartan Day, which is April 6th. It was a fundraiser for a good friend of mine's Highland dancing group that she was taking to Scotland. It was a fundraiser for that. And I did a whole tartan fashion show. I still wasn't really thinking that this was what I was going to do. I just did it for fun. We basically took a whole bunch of clothes that we already had and made a few others and put them on the runway. Because this is something my mother and I have been doing for years, since I was a teenager probably, making tartan clothes in modern styles, just using tartan. And people would always come up and say, where did you get that? Because it's so unique, it really wasn't being done at the time. So, this is something that we had a whole bunch of pieces of. We just kind of threw them together. We had it at the Marquee Club here in Halifax. It was a great show. It was really fun. And afterwards, there were so many people that were like, this is something that we need. Yeah. Can you do this every year? And I thought like, oh, I mean, putting this on every year would be a lot. And then it was kind of in those next few months that I had a bunch of close friends and my mother all kind of like, this maybe is something that you should kind of investigate doing. The very first Atlantic Fashion Week was that October 2008. I wrote Angela Campanoni, who's still the director of AFW, and I said, this is my idea. I already put on one show in April. This was probably June maybe. And I said, is this something that might fit, or is it too East Coast kind of thing? And she said, no, this is so different from anybody else. So you should totally be in the show. So I worked that whole fall, like summer fall, to kind of figure out what the collection was going to be. Looking back, there was no cohesion. None of the pieces made sense together. I forget how many pieces were in the collection, 20, maybe 25, and every single piece was completely unique from each other, which is fine, but no two pieces went together at all. And they were just completely different all over the map. But anyway, I did it, and I put this collection on, and that was featured in Fashion Magazine, which was a national Canadian fashion magazine at the time. Wow. And so that was just kind of the launching point.
What was your reaction?
I still had been thinking that it was going to be some kind of hobby that I might just put on a fashion show once a year. I had taken the pieces, I'd put retail prices on them if anybody wanted to buy them, which, instantly people started buying them. But it wasn't sustainable for a full-time job at that point yet. But I still had been kind of thinking that it was just going to be a little side hobby for me. And after the Fashion Magazine article, I was just sort of like, oh, maybe this is something that could be a real thing.
Yeah. So I assume at this point, you're making all the pieces yourself. There's not really much help. How do you keep that afloat? If you're starting to get more requests, and you probably get more clients over time, how did you juggle all that?
Well, 12 years later, I still am making every piece myself. Wow. It's certainly not easy, but I make bespoke garments. They're one of a kind, custom made to each individual person. Yeah. And that's not an easy thing to teach somebody. It's certainly not impossible. Of course, people can learn to be tailors. But it's just something super unique where you need to have the tailoring skills and the ability to work with tartan. And everybody knows what tartan looks like. There's lines that are going in every direction. Well, when you make a dart, a seam, a tuck, anything, all of those lines have to match perfectly. If one is even a millimeter off, it's very clear when you look at the garment that it's off. So sewing with tartan takes much longer than sewing a solid piece of fabric. Anything with a pattern, but tartan has it going in both directions. So you've got to be kind of on your game. So to find somebody that has the tailoring skills and knowledge of tartans, it's not just even working with matching up patterns, it's that there's 600, 700, 800 different tartans that are available. I certainly don't know all 800,
Yeah.
but I know several hundred just from a first glance of looking at it. That's a really hard thing to find in a person.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Wow.
And I know it because my mom, I was her first employee sewing belt buckles on kilts way back in the day. So I saw thousands of kilts go through her studio in the first years that I was learning how to sew.
So along with like making the materials, how do you juggle like the business and like the social media? How do you balance all those elements to your business?
Well, Travis, I'm not sure that I would call what I do balancing. I wish I was better at it.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's a single person who's, the big tag word now is solopreneur. Anybody who owns a company and they're the only person in that company, I'm not sure any of us would say that we're doing all of it really well.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty hard to say that you're a jack of all trades, but master of none. That's the whole line, right? And I really do feel like that a lot of times. I think I'm not really good at any of them. I try to focus as much as I can on the garment because that's the most important thing. That's the thing that's going to last a lot longer than a Facebook post or, anything like that. But it's tough because it's not just social media, it's also emailing customers because I'm also the only person that does that. And website maintenance, which this week alone has been a nightmare for my business. It's really tough to wear all of the hats. And I do find that quite difficult. I find that social media ends up being the last one on the list because it's almost the most important, and yet it's the thing that can go by the wayside the easiest because making the garment has to happen. Responding to the customer has to happen. So at the end of the day, if I don't have time to make a post, the post isn't being made. But I do find I can get into a groove sometimes. I'm much better at it leading up to a collection where it's there's more interesting content. I'm doing fittings. I'm making new garments, new things. I find my day-to-day life in the studio, people assure me this isn't true. I find that it would be too boring for somebody to be looking at, where I'm making the same thing over and over, or just, sitting frustrated at the sewing machine because it's jammed. Like that to me is not, that's my daily life. But I don't know that it's something that people need to see.
So like you mentioned how doing the same process over and over again. How do you as a creative individual, how do you stay inspired? Like how do you keep that kind of creative fire going?
I feel like I've been asked this in every interview I've ever done in 12 years.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably the hardest question to answer.
Hardest is probably most annoying.
Well, and not even annoying, it's just, because it makes you go like, oh, am I? Am I staying inspired? I think there's time, obviously there's going to be struggles with that. There's going to be times where you do not feel inspired. There's going to be times where you I think the hardest thing is to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to come up with an idea right now. That's almost impossible, to force yourself to be creative in a very short period of time. I try and ride the wave when it happens. So if I wake up in the middle of the night and have an idea, I won't wait till the morning because I'll forget. I'll turn on my lamp and grab a notepad and start writing it down. Honestly, in my dreams, which sounds so lame, but that's where a lot of big ideas have come from, ideas for whole collections. So I try and jump on it when I have the inspiration. And I try not to force it. Because like I said, it's like telling a musician, write a song right now. That's really hard to do without taking the time. I find that there are certain things that I can do to get myself into that mindset. That includes leaving my studio. I am not creative in my studio very often. I'll go to the library, I'll go sit by the water, I'll go sit in the commons, I'll do something where I'm either outside or just in a completely different new space. And out of that, customer emails, website problems, all of that, put that away, and then try and nurture those ideas. But I think it's really, really hard to try and force yourself to be creative. This week I'm going to sketch. Well, this week might not be your creative time, and you have to just not be upset about that. Not be upset with yourself for not coming up with a great idea right then, because next week might be the best idea you've ever had. Working in a creative industry is really tough because all businesses have the exact same things that need to happen. Paperwork, website, social media, admin stuff. None of that stuff is sexy. None of it is creative. None of it is particularly fun for a creative type.
Yeah.
We all have to do that part. We all would rather just do the creative part.
Yeah.
But we can't. You have to put that hat on and then take that hat off. I personally find that I cannot do both at the same time. I cannot be creative and logical together. I need to be one for a week and then put the logical hat back on and do my taxes or whatever. Like I can't be both all the time. You have to choose your moments. So how do I stay inspired? You have to choose your moments.
Yeah. With all that like chaos kind of going around you, in what ways do you find like peace? At what times, or do you have as like being like an independent businesswoman, how have you found ways to kind of pull yourself away from this part of your life, like relaxing or whatnot? Like, do you have anything that is a go-to? I'm
not particularly good at doing nothing. I have to be doing something. I can't just sit and watch a movie. I have to be on my phone at the same time, or sketching something, or painting something. I find it really hard to just, like, my mind will start drifting. In my regular life, I don't have a lot of extra time. I don't have a lot of time to sit and watch the latest episode of whatever. I'll have stuff on in the studio while I'm working. But I can't just every night shut it off, and I usually work until I go to bed. But I have several times over the last number of years done this, but I've done it every single night for the last 2-3 months now. Whenever I finish work, that could be 11 p.m., it could be 6 a.m., and it's often 2, 3, 4 a.m. I shut down the lights in the studio, I put my sneakers on, and I walk around Citadel Hill. You can see the whole city from there. I usually walk around it a couple times. It's about 1 kilometer around each time. I usually walk around it a couple times. It's the best view in the city. It's also, there's no lights up on Citadel Hill, so it's kind of a little more peaceful. And it's also often windy, so it just feels really nice. It's not only fresh air, it's like blowing fresh air on your face. I feel like it just clears my head, and not just the exercise part, but just the mental clarity, you know. I'll listen to an audiobook, music, whatever, and just walk around the hill a couple times, and I do it right before I go to bed, and I find that's the best thing. You need to have that mental break where you're not physically doing something. My mind is still on. I'm still going through to-do lists for tomorrow, but I'm not physically sewing or at the computer.
So, like, in those times, like, do you need to be, like, in order to be, like, distracted or taken away, like, do you need to have that kind of immersive feeling? Like, it seems like you're someone that has to be, like, in the moment. Is that something that you kind of describe as, like, a character trait?
I suppose, yes. I would say that I probably do need to be in the moment, although I can't pick and choose all the time, because I do still have to work. There's many days where I wake up and I do not want to sit at the sewing machine or at the computer or fight with tech support for my website for 5 hours. I don't want to do those things, but I'm also an adult, and sometimes those things need to be done. I know I said a little earlier that you just have to go with it when you're feeling creative. That's not always possible. You can't always do that, and it's would be lovely to be a prima donna and think like, no, the inspiration's hitting me, so I'm going to, goodbye all responsibility today. I'm going to just focus on this. That's not possible all the time, and you just have to put on your big girl pants and you have to get to work. And I absolutely can do that. I absolutely, probably more often than not, have to do that. Eventually you kind of find your flow. You get into it. Tomorrow's a new day.
So on another note, it seems like you work with like a lot of like Celtic dance teams. Am I correct? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Highland
Dance teams. My bad. Can you describe like what the kind of personality of those kind of clients would be like, if you can even get to that?
Sure. Yeah, I work with like I'm on the management team for the Canadian Highland Dance team called Canadiana Celtic, and we've gone to Scotland a few times, and we've gone to Switzerland a number of times and done big shows over there. And I've often either helped or fully made the costumes for those teams. That's kind of a different beast because I'm a part of the team itself and I'm there with them. But I also work with a lot of individual Highland dancers. And so I'm oftentimes dealing with the mothers of the dancers. It's oftentimes, these costumes are not cheap. They're something that the dancer has to have. There's very strict competitive rules about what they're allowed to wear and more importantly what they're not allowed to wear. And so the parts that I make in my business, it's not a cheap garment. They have a high price tag because they take a long time to make. And I understand that the mothers, it's a lot of stress oftentimes for them because it's very expensive. They want it to fit exactly right, or have growing room if they're young. And I can appreciate that. I was a dancer myself. My mom was a Highland dancing mom. So I don't know, I think, there's obviously going to be the occasional customer that's supremely difficult, but that's the case in any group. It doesn't matter what your target market is, there will be difficult people in that target market. But you just have to kind of try and understand where they're coming from, take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with everything happening now, like with the pandemic, where's that put you?
It's difficult. For the first number of months, 4 or 5 months probably, all of the mills in the UK shut down because of the pandemic. So that makes things really difficult, and you have to kind of pivot a little bit. A lot of the garments that I make are for, events, formal or otherwise. Those aren't happening right now. There's also no Highland dancing events happening at all. That makes what I do currently fairly irrelevant. I know that's not going to last forever. Hopefully at some point in 2021 we can get back to some of these things. So it's not like my whole business is going to die, but I have to kind of pivot a little bit and figure out, okay, well, how can I keep afloat in the meantime? So I'm just trying to focus on more of my accessories, which I've always made, but I used to kind of focus on the garments especially, but I'm just focusing more on accessories and things now.
So for people that might not be into like Highland dancing, what kind of items can they purchase from your business?
So I only do a couple of very specific things for Highland dancers. The rest of my business is not. I mean, there's a lot of Highland dancers that purchase my things because they like tartan, but my garments and accessories are not targeted towards Highland dancers necessarily. I do a lot of stuff, like for instance, velvet and tartan stockings for Christmas. That's going to be the next big thing that's going to be happening, that I'm going to get a lot of orders for. But I also do a lot of hair accessories. I do like note cards and I do belts and cuff bracelets, and I make a lot of different things. I'm trying to constantly kind of expand into different things that people might be interested in. It's just sort of, right now kind of scrambling to figure all that out.
Wow. I was curious. So as being an independent businesswoman, for people that might be wanting to branch in and create something of their own, what kind of advice would you give to them? Because it's a hard market, not just your market per se, but just the fashion industry on its own. It's a tough market to get into. It is. It's very tough, and I have been asked this question, I can't tell you how many times in the last dozen years, by people who want to get into the industry, either fashion students or people who just love the idea of being a fashion designer. And I say every single time, it is so important to have a niche, because it's almost impossible in today's world of fast fashion. You can't compete with the mall. It's too inexpensive to buy clothes at the mall. You cannot compete with H&M, you can't compete with Zara, you can't compete with any of those stores. They have massive factories overseas who are making clothes for pennies, and they're selling a dress for $19.99.
it's almost impossible to compete with that. So you can't just go in. I'm speaking negatively here, saying you can't. I suppose you could. It's just ill-advised to try and go into fashion making just pretty garments. There has to be something that sets you apart. So mine is obviously a very specific niche, and I create clothes out of Scottish and Irish fabrics, which is very specific. It doesn't have to be that specific, but there has to be something. Are your fabrics eco-friendly? There's a huge market for people who are looking for super sustainable clothing. Is it made ethically? There's so many questions to ask yourself. Are you making only things using a certain color? Are you making things only for a certain group of people? You really have to find that niche and figure out what it is you're passionate about over and above fashion. What is it that you're specifically passionate about? What does your style mean? What kind of fabrics are you going to use? And who are you marketing towards? It in 2020 / hopefully 2021, when things get a little more normal, it's almost impossible to just try and market to the general world. It's too broad, and there's too many people doing the same thing but probably better, and have more resources. So find a niche.
So on that same note, like, it's easy to say find a niche, but where do you go to explore that? Like, is there certain people you should talk to? Like, where do you go?
I say just find a piece of paper. Either go sit at the library, go sit in the commons, go down by the water, do whatever you need to do. Drink a bottle of wine, I don't care. Smoke a joint, whatever it is that you do to clear your head a little bit. Take a notepad and write down things that you like. And I'm not saying fashion you like or style you like. I mean, in the world, what makes you happy? What do you enjoy? Is it soccer? Is it red wine? Is it, I don't know, puppies? Whatever it is, write down everything you can think of. Start writing things that shoot off of those things. I'm telling you, eventually, you'll start to see trends in your own self, in your own life, in the things that you enjoy and the things that you are passionate about. It doesn't have to have anything to do with fashion. They aren't all going to make sense. They aren't all going to be included, but it kind of helps to give you a better idea of who you are, even if you think you know yourself really well. When you start to write it down, it's kind of interesting to look at and kind of figure out, like, oh, okay, right. These kind of go together, or these kind of go together. And there might be something when you step back from it and think, like, okay, this is something I'm passionate about. Is there an avenue here? Is there something I can do with this? And it might not end up being fashion, but it might be something that you know that doesn't exist already, that you can make a market from.
So, like, on that note, like, when you figure that out, from your practice, do you come up with a list of goals that you want to achieve? Do you set timelines for yourself? Like, coming back to your experiences, like, how do you keep progressing from that point when you finally figure out your niche?
Right. I think that's a really good question, and I think that's probably an exercise that I need to do more. I think it's really hard once you're already in that niche and you're already moving forward with your business, especially where you're a one-man band and you're doing all the things. It can be hard to take that time. It can be hard to stop and take a step back. I do find that my nightly walks around the hill do help with that. I feel like I can sort of get out of my own head and, figure out what it is I need to be working on. But it is important, at least once a year, probably more like twice quarterly, whatever a year, to really think about, okay, what is next? What is 6 months from now? If you have a business like I do, where, say, for instance, Christmas is around the corner, I need to start marketing Christmas stuff now, because tarten is a very Christmassy thing, but also it's a very family time, and tarten is a family thing. This is the time that I need to be photographing, coming up with Christmas things. That can be really difficult. I really need to start making things, and I start coming up with ideas in the summer for Christmas. That's really hard. When you're sitting on a patio in August, it's really hard to think about Christmas. I don't particularly, I love Christmas at Christmas time. I'm not the kind of person that likes to hear Christmas music in July. So it's tough as a business person to sometimes be thinking that far ahead and be putting yourself in a different season when the season you're in is not that time at all. But those are things you have to do, and you have to just kind of put yourself like, okay, if it were fall, what would I want to wear? And go from there.
Wow. One thing that always it's kind of like moves me by hearing what you're saying is how you can convey it so precisely and so like in such a positive way, and like you're so honest with your words. And the one thing I'm curious about is like, how do you, in times like these especially, how do you stay positive and like get that composure when like maybe you could wake up in the morning and be like, oh my god, like why do I gotta go do this? Like how do you get that energy to come out?
I mean, right now, currently, I put makeup on and put lipstick on, and I'm sitting here with you, and you know, so it's important for me to be positive in this moment. Yeah. In the last 7 months, have I been positive every day? No, ma'am. Absolutely not. I don't think there's a single person that's been positive every day of this crazy pandemic.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why it's been not easy for me to keep going, but important for me to keep going, is because things have changed a lot, not just in the world, not just with the pandemic, but with my business. You know, it's like, oh, crap, this is, okay, right. So, you know, there's no time to let the ball fumble. You can't do that. That's not a thing that can happen today. And I also, you know, have been raised to be a very hard worker, and I always have been. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I actually enjoy it to an extent. And so I just think it's important to just keep moving, even if you're not really accomplishing much. At least try to figure out something that day that you can do to like check one thing off the list. It can be really tough, the positivity part. I'm not naturally a super positive person. I'm also not naturally a super pessimistic person. I refer to myself as a realist. And I also understand that realistically, this isn't going to last forever. We might not ever go back to the way things were, but it's also not going to be terrible forever, necessarily, hopefully. So you just have to think of the bigger picture. Things suck today. Things have sucked this year. But in the realm of your life, it's a blip. So you just have to move on.
It's a good way to put it, in all honesty. I love how honest you are about it. Like, so many people would just answer the question and just be like, oh, whatever. But you let it out.
I'm not good at... I've never been a good liar. I'm not good at disingenuousness. I'm genuinely... I am who I am. And I say what I mean.
Yeah. On that note, like, for people that might see you from the outside, kind of looking in or from afar, what would you want people to know about you?
Oh, that's a good question. Never been asked that one. Interesting. Oh, what would I like people to know about me? I think probably what I just said. Yeah. I am a fiercely loyal person. When I take somebody into my inner circle, that's not a quick thing that happens necessarily, but once they're in there, you know, I'm there for life. And also that I am brutally honest about not only things that are happening, but also myself. Yeah. If you meet me and I tell you I like you, I mean it. Yeah.
Awesome. So lastly, if you could, like, looking at what you know now, if you could go back and tell your younger self something that you've, like, I don't know, like something you've learned, what would you tell your younger self?
What age are we talking? How young?
Let's say 5 years before you start your business.
Okay. Who? Don't marry him. Moisturize. And listen to your intuition.
Intuition.
Yeah.
Wow. And then also, when you start your business.
Moisturize. Listen to your intuition. And be a better business person. I focus so much on the designs and the clothes. I remember meeting a big high up in the Canadian fashion world. She's from Toronto. And there was this fashion competition here. She was a judge for it. She was like the president of the Fashion Design Council of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And she was interviewing all of us for this competition this is years ago. And so she said, I was focused on the clothes that I had brought in, and we had a model, and they got to change the outfit and stuff. And so I brought all my best gowns and things, and everybody was oohing and awing over the clothes, And she started asking me all these business questions, like bottom line numbers and all this kind of stuff. And I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people, but only about things I know. I'm not a good numbers girl. I'm not a good business person, financial person. It's not my strength.
Yeah.
Really good at math, actually, but just not good at my own business. And she started asking me all these things, and I kind of was fumbling a little. And she said, look, nobody is disputing how gorgeous your clothes are. Lots of people can make pretty clothes. What are you going to do that's better? And I was like, ooh, right. You got me there. She said, you have to be better. You, Veronica, have to be better. And I was saying this to somebody, that's rude. And I said, no, she's right. I do. I need to be a better business person. Because like she said, so many people can make pretty clothes. And that goes back earlier when we were talking about what advice would I give. Mm-hmm. You can't just make pretty clothes. There has to be a niche. There has to be a reason. You have to be able to speak to that specific piece and say, this is why this is an important piece of clothing to have in the world right now. If you can't do that, and if you can't stand behind it, what are you doing? You have to be better.
Wow. That's a really good piece of advice.
Yes. Oh, it sticks with me.
Yeah.
I think about that woman, as brash as she was. I think about her all the time in reference to my own ability to run a business, which I'm still not, that was years ago, I'm still not good at that. It's still not my strength. I get better bit by bit. 12 years later, I'm still climbing out of that dirt hole. But, it's something that you constantly have to improve on. Everybody has their weaknesses. Everybody has something in whatever job they're doing that they're not particularly that good at. I don't think there's a single person in the world that whatever their job is, they're super good at every aspect of. So that thing, you can't just keep getting down on yourself for it. You just have to keep improving on it. You can't drop everything else to focus on it necessarily. But you have to keep making it more important to focus on. You're only as good as your weakest link. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you're not good at this, you have to focus a little more time on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's some insight I've never had in my life, but I appreciate it.
Now you're going to be thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm going to be thinking tonight about that one.
Be better.
Be better. But, wow, that's got to be an accumulation of, more than a decade of hard work, so.
And
that's what it takes.
Ultimately, there is no replacement for that. Mm-hmm. You can't jump 6 months in and have the same experiences as I have 12 years in. And I certainly do not know all. I still feel like a newbie. I still feel like I have so much to learn about all aspects of this industry. But I am just going to have more experiences than somebody a couple years in, because I've just physically put in the work. And I've done the literal hundreds of fashion shows and photo shoots and collections. Last year I tore all the ligaments in my thumb, and I had a full cast on for 2 weeks, the 2 weeks leading up to my fashion show. So I had to create a collection one-handed, and
oh my gosh,
talk about fun. But I did it. You have to. One foot in front of the other.
You're a modern day fighter. Yeah.
You got it.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
It's very insightful, very good information for up and coming people in the industry. So
I hope. You have to, it's fun to live in the clouds, but you also have to have 2 feet on the ground.
Great point. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Travis.
Awesome.